Hello, everyone, and welcome to LDM Radio Sports Talk, the show that talks about sports and other topics relatable to sports fans. My name is Alfonso Caldero, and joining me as a co-host this week is Scott Blander.
Hello. Thank you for having me back. Appreciate it.
All right, excellent. So we're going to jump into a little bit of a short, fun topic. Scott, you have some information about the NCAA lacrosse?
Top story going on in my sports where our listeners are not really that in tune on college lacrosse, but this is a big time of year for me being a Maryland guy, Maryland alum. Let me ask you something as a sports fan. Now it works a little different than it does in like the basketball rankings and whatnot, but one thing I can't understand, there's two polls. And Maryland is undefeated, 12-0, 13-0 now. And for some reason, a 3 seed in the tournament behind two lost teams. Now, I understand that funds are probably not all that up on the lacrosse, but does that make any sense to you at all?
Unfortunately, because of the way college football is, where a bunch of people, a bunch of teams have, different rankings, all because of strength of opponents and how big their schools are, and probably how much money they put back into the overall foundation. Whatever the case is. Actually, it's not shocking because of that. Because there's so many people. When we were doing college football, Harris and I were going back and forth on different rankings, and it just made it makes sense that it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Now, Maryland and Rutgers both left the ACC, went to the Big Ten 7 years ago or so. And Maryland is a premier program in lacrosse, both men's and women's. But the Big Ten is really not. And I guess that's probably what it is that the ACC, you've got Duke and North Carolina, the two teams that are ahead of them, which infuriates me just because it's those two teams.
I know, right? They do it in lacrosse too, huh? Basketball and lacrosse?
Hey, watch your mouth. Well, since we left the ACC, Duke is no longer a thorn in my side in basketball, at least. But clearly they are in lacrosse. In fact, I was just looking at the women's bracket. Duke just knocked out Maryland women. That's very nice. And I should add that Maryland women is a 14-time national champion. So, yeah, I get what you're saying about the conferences. The ACC is definitely stronger than the Big Ten in lacrosse, but we're not talking about like in basketball, some mid-major from a team that's nobody's ever heard of going 25-0 and then finding themselves a 15 seed in the tournament and playing Duke. We might be in a weaker conference, but at least we're still a top team. But in any case, so be it. No more whining from me. We play Notre Dame, another one of my hated schools. We play Notre Dame on Saturday in the second round of the men's tournament. So anybody interested in that, that'll be on the Big Ten Network. And if anybody hasn't really watched college lacrosse at that level, if you like hockey, then you'll like college lacrosse. And I definitely recommend checking that out, at least for a few minutes just to see. Because, these guys it's literally like, field hockey is a sport. But in the true sense of the term field hockey, that is what lacrosse would be. It's basically hockey played on grass. These guys crush each other. It's very fast paced. It is exciting to watch these guys and the women, of course, at this level with the level of talent is just unbelievable to watch. So I don't know what the other games are on, but I do know that the Maryland game will be on the Big Ten Network Saturday. Don't know the time. A little homework for our viewers. Look that up.
All right. Well, I know that.
Thank you for giving me the time on that topic, Fonz. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, just one more footnote on that. it's weird that it's widely known that a lot of baseball like people who like baseball don't like lacrosse, and people who like lacrosse don't like baseball. It's kind of like a weird thing. But you actually like baseball and you like lacrosse, so that's actually like a weird crossover there. From my understanding, anyway. I've never really gotten into lacrosse myself, but it
And
wasn't like
I
I
think,
hated it just because I
I'm
like
sorry, I didn't
baseball.
mean to interrupt you.
No, good.
Yeah, and that's probably from having gone to school there. I went to Maryland 94 to 98, and going to games because I never played lacrosse growing up. Going to games and watching it firsthand at that level, I'm like, wow, this is a great sport. So it's kind of hard to not go to Maryland, regardless of what your favorite sports are. It's kind of hard to go to a school like Maryland and not get into it, at least on some level. The people who are actually from Maryland, they're nuts. They're obsessed with it. And up here, it's very big in the high schools around here. New Jersey, Long Island's always been big. Hofstra's a big lacrosse school, and it's really grown in this area, and pretty much nationwide in the high schools. And that's probably, having gone to Maryland, that's probably also why I love college basketball, and I'm not really that big of an NBA fan. Again, 94 to 98, I saw Joe Smith was on Maryland freshman year. I got to see them play Duke and North Carolina, Jerry Stackhouse, Rasheed Wallace, North Carolina teams. The Duke teams were incredible, of course. And just watching that kind of basketball, two top 10 in the nation programs going at it with the student section and the band and rushing the court. And, it's kind of hard to watch ACC basketball at that level and then turn around and watch the NBA. And it's just basically two different sports for me. So I'm trying with the NBA, but it's, you go to a school like that and you have a different perspective on, basketball and, of course, lacrosse, like you mentioned.
I agree 100%. Actually, I didn't go to a major college. Actually, didn't go to college at all. But I could understand that would be a big selling point in people who have like a favorite team for a college, because that's like, that's your brand and that's the one you love. And I think in New York, there's not many, I guess big colleges when it comes, maybe Syracuse, Rutgers to a degree, I guess, but not like those big, dominant schools in different sports. I think that's why I never really gravitated towards college sports in itself. But a lot of people who follow college sports, they kind of just like pick a team, or they just pick like two teams because there's like over 100 big schools and
Sure.
all over the country. So it's an interesting dynamic. But it's basically it's a slam dunk if you actually went to that school. Then it's like, oh yeah, 100%. Like that definitely should be your favorite.
What's funny about that is there's a Facebook group I'm in, college football Facebook group called Any Given Saturday. I don't know if you're in that group, but it's basically a lot of New York, New Jersey people and whatnot. And like you just said, since there isn't really a big school, and New York is one of the only cities in the country where the pro sports are bigger than the college sports. You go to Miami, even in the Dan Marino era, Dolphins were blacked out playoff games. Miami, Dan Marino led Miami Dolphin playoff games were blacked out because they couldn't fill up. But 0-8 Miami Hurricanes team is still going to sell out. Tennessee, of course, the pretty much anywhere you go outside of New York.
A little in and out there.
What's that?
Your feed's dropping a little in and out
there. Yeah, I don't see my picture. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, if you could just take it from the top again.
I was saying Miami, New York blackout is pretty much one of maybe the Northeast. New York and Philly, maybe Boston, are pretty much the only cities where the pro teams are more popular and outweigh the college teams. You go down south, Miami. I was saying, I don't know if any of that, if anybody heard any of that, but Miami, even in the Dan Marino era of playoff games, they were blacked out on TV, and those were some phenomenal Miami Dolphins teams. Whereas you could have an 0-8 Miami Hurricanes team, and they're still it's going to be packed, and they're going to be tailgating and partying like it's the Orange Bowl. But in New York, you don't have that. So I was saying, there's this Facebook group for college football, and a lot of New York and New Jersey people, and they're all Texas, Tennessee, Florida State fans and whatnot. And I get in there in the rare event that Maryland wins a football game. I'll get in there and post, and people will start commenting like, who's a Maryland fan? Why Maryland? I went to school there. I didn't ask for this football program. This is the football program I'm stuck with.
That's awesome. So let's segue into the aforementioned NBA. So let me paint this scenario for you, because I know you're not a huge basketball fan, but there was an interesting development here. The way the playoff format went, simply, we covered it a couple weeks ago, was all right. So the NBA playoffs is just like the hockey playoffs, 1 through 8. So the 1 through 6 seeds were automatically into the playoffs. The 7th seed was determined by a game between the 7th place team and the 8th place team. In the Eastern Conference, this was the 7th team was the 7th place team was the Boston Celtics, and the 8th place team was the Washington Wizards. They played a game against each other. The 7th place Boston Celtics ended up winning the game, so they've owned the 7th seed. And the 9th seeded Pacers, the 9th place Pacers played the 10th place Charlotte Hornets, and the Indiana Pacers won. So they are going to play the Washington Wizards now, who lost the initial game, and whoever wins that game will be the 8th seed. Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, it does, actually. I'm looking at the standings now, and I remember last week or so, I think LeBron James made a comment where he was totally against the play-in, and I don't mean to switch to hockey, but just to reference hockey, what they did last year when season, got put on hiatus and there were 10 games left, and the Rangers, for example, were a perfect example of a team on the bubble that was really streaking. So they did the 5-game playoffs of the 7 through 9 or however much it was, and that was controversial. And I love that, because you couldn't play the remaining 10 games given the circumstances, but you gave the top 2 seeds in the top 2 teams in the bubble and the bottom 2 teams looking in, or the top 2 teams looking in, I guess I should say, you gave them a shot to earn that playoff spot. Who's to say 7 and 8 wouldn't have dropped down those last 10 games, and who's to say 9 and 10 wouldn't have come on strong and taken a spot? So I like what they did with that. So the fact that the NBA is doing something similar, I have no problem with that at all. I actually enjoy it. I like that.
Yeah, so the NBA actually, in its own bubble in Orlando, they had a situation where they had 22 teams. So it was a little bit different than what the NHL offered. It was 22 teams, and they basically finished out the regular season, the last 8 games. But it was only the 22 teams that were invited. So, the ones who were, way mathematically out, they were just out.
Right.
Yeah. So, and they had success with that as far as the ratings went, and for the actual the excitement going into the bracket of 16 when it was set. So the NBA went back and they played 72 games this past season instead of the regular 82 games. So they basically just made a mini play-in round with the last with the 7 through 10 seeds, and they made it out. So as far as the East goes, the 7th-seeded Celtics are still the 7th. The 7th place team is the actual 7th seed, so there was no change there. If the Washington Wizards win, that game's tonight, if they beat the Indiana Pacers, then there's really no harm, no foul. The top 8 teams in the exact order they were supposed to be in are going into the playoffs. So all depends on what happens tonight.
Yeah, no, I'm looking. I got the standings up now. I'm looking at that. Yeah, that's a great way to do things. That really is. How many games? I'm terrible at math here. 49 and 59, 69. All right, 72 games. All right, so they play about 72 games or so.
They
which
played
is
72 games this year. Every year is 82 games, so they missed out
okay.
on
So they
10
did the
games.
same Sagi. All right, so they were 10 games short of a full season. So yeah, I think that's a great thing to do
Yeah, I
because
think it was
you
good
know
for this year. I don't think moving forward it should be something that they continue doing. The
right.
one thing is like in the East the ninth and the ninth and 10th seeds, like they were just way under 500.
Right.
So it was just kind of like I don't know. Like I think it made more sense in the West than it did in the East. So
Yeah, which is strange because in isn't the West usually significantly stronger? I mean, again, not the biggest fan, but I know that uh, the Warriors were setting records for a few years there. The Lakers, obviously, since they got LeBron, were incredible. I'm looking here, Lakers, Golden State, 7 and 8.
yeah, basically
That's something I'm going to assume is kind of strange given the times we live in here.
Yeah, no,
But
well, the Lakers and the Wizards, the whole reason how they got to that last game, which we'll get to in a second, was because of injury. Really,
right.
LeBron
Yeah, no,
James missed a
LeBron's been
long
out.
stretch. Anthony Davis missed a really long stretch. I think he only played like half the seasons. And then the Warriors have had their issues. They haven't had Klay Thompson the whole year. They basically just had Steph Curry and then whoever else step up on any given night. So going into that one, so the seventh-seeded Lakers played the eighth-seeded Golden State Warriors, and the Lakers ended up winning that game. The whole reason why LeBron James was upset about it was because they should have just been in the seventh seed anyway, which is what they ended up doing. So no harm, no foul. He's not upset. Everything's cool. And
thank God for that.
in the ninth place team was the Memphis Grizzlies, and the 10th place team was the San Antonio Spurs. They ended up facing off, and the Memphis Grizzlies ended up winning. So the ninth place team will go on the road to Oakland and then play the Golden State Warriors. And that game will be tomorrow night, and that'll determine who's the eighth seed. So again, if the Golden State Warriors end up beating the Memphis Grizzlies, then it's the top 8 teams. It will be the same, and nothing happens. So it's up to the Grizzlies and the Pacers to try to throw a wrench into what would normally have been your classic 1 through 8 seeds.
Yeah. Let me say on a personal note, congratulations about your New York Knickerbockers. You must be very excited.
Well, all right, so we got our local news. We have the New Jersey Nets, who finished in second place. They're going to play the aforementioned Boston Celtics. So the Celtics, they had to beat the Wizards, and their reward for that is having to beat the Brooklyn Nets in a series where potentially they have all 3 of their big stars in place with Kyrie Irving and James Harden and Kevin Durant all expected to play. Like how injury-free they're going to be for the playoffs all remains to be seen, but they all look like they're about to start. And then yes.
Yeah, well that Nets team when they're healthy, that is a scary looking roster.
Yeah, it's they've only played 10 games, all 3 of them together. So, as far as, chemistry goes, as far as camaraderie, all of that could be, it all remains to be seen. I think they definitely, potential-wise, they have, one of the greatest offenses in NBA history going into the playoffs, potential-wise. So let's see if it actually ends up panning out because somebody has to, sacrifice and not get 20 points potentially. So, who's it going to be? Somebody has to, shoot less than 20 shots a game. So that it's all remains to be seen who's going to step up in that regard. But it'll be fun to watch there. And then the New York Knicks, yes, they got the 4th seed. They have home court advantage for their first round series against the Atlanta Hawks.
Nice. How many years is this since they made the playoffs?
8 years.
That's honestly, and I'm not making a joke. I honestly thought it was more like 15, but okay.
Well,
yeah,
they haven't made the finals since 1999. They've been
the Heat, right?
they've been, dipping in and out of the playoffs ever since. Not really anything consistent since then. 2013 is when they ended up winning the Atlantic Division, and
Oh, sure.
they made it to the second round and lost to the Indiana Pacers. So it's been a really, really long time for Knicks fans. The energy's
Yeah.
there. They're excited about it. I think it's different because, if you're a Brooklyn Nets fan, which is totally cool, big bias with that. And then there's also your those Knicks fans that when a Knicks fan who lives in Brooklyn or close proximity to Brooklyn ended up getting the Nets, and then they transferred over their fandom, which is absolutely possible. For Nets fans, they should be excited, but they basically were excited when they basically clinched the playoffs when they signed Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. Let's face it. So, at some point they were going to be able to make the playoffs, and it's actually kind of surprising that they didn't get the number 1 seed over the Philadelphia 76ers. But as far as the New York Knicks go, the New York Knicks, they had no expectations. This was like a very, very, very slow process in coming, but the free agent signing of Julius Randle helped get them to this point, and then actually drafting. They drafted R.J. Barrett, number 3 overall, and he seems to be going out pretty well. He's coming from Duke, which is your favorite college of.
Yeah, him. I actually he's Canadian, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Him I know from on 2 fronts. People, I used to live in North Carolina. I think you knew that back in 2005. So my Duke fan friends, I know his name from that, and Patrick, our Montreal friend. They don't get all that many big Canadian stars, so they're real happy about him too. And he was, I guess he's probably the best one since, I guess you would say, Steve Nash, I guess, right?
Yeah, I'd have to assume. And then, he's only 20 years old, so there's much more of a ceiling. And then Julius Randle is 26 years old, so as far as superstardom and hitting the ceiling, they still have a bit of ways to go. One thing about this team is that they basically they worked hard, and they got to where they are now. Not from the big splashy signings, which is very easy to excel in the NBA. If you just sign like 1 or 2 max contract stars, then automatically you're basically in the playoffs at that point. But the Knicks, they did it the right way. They ended up, signing key free agents, some role players, and in their roles, they're doing really, really well. But the one thing I like about this team is that a guy like Julius Randle, this year he had something around 160 3-pointers, and this year alone he had more than he had for his entire career before this year. Which was something around 150. So he basically taught himself how to be more versatile and to be a more consistent 3-point shooter, and it's not only helped out the Knicks, but it's helped out himself, and he's basically punched his ticket to be a max contract superstar at some point, hopefully with the Knicks. But if it's not with the Knicks, then whoever else he ends up playing with next. I think it's amazing to have somebody who actually teaches themselves how to elevate their game, almost overnight. It took, from season to season, it was just a huge jump, which is great.
Yeah, no, definitely. No, these names you're giving me and these stories you're giving me, this is definitely a lot to go on to get myself interested and get myself caught up.
Yeah, well, the Knicks, there's some people who are not picking the Knicks. The Knicks and the Hawks, they're almost one and the same as far as being young and inexperienced, because the Hawks were a lottery team last year too. So, they both basically just come into their own as a team. So, the Hawks could win, the Knicks could win. There's, it's kind of like a toss-up. It's not exactly a real definitive thing. Obviously I think the Knicks are going to win, but I might be a little bit biased there too. Who knows? But I would pick them in that series. If they do end up winning that series, and then they would move on to face the Philadelphia 76ers, which would be the top team in the league. So that would be something else.
Well, and you said it perfectly before. You said it exceeded expectations. And going from a lottery team to a solid 4 seed, not even just a playoff team, it's expected. A lottery team, you'd like to just make the playoffs, but a 4 seed, they're in the upper, not only to make the playoffs, but they're in the upper echelon of playoffs. That's obviously, you got to be thrilled about that. And yeah, like you said, exceeded expectations. So I'll give you another cliche: playing with house money. So yeah, we're all fans, and just making the playoffs, that wears off quickly because you're in the playoffs. You want to win. You want to win the title. Whatever is realistic, that's remains to be seen. But no matter what happens, of course you're excited and you deserve it. You guys, like you said, you guys have been waiting a long time for this. That being said, once the playoffs start, it's everybody's it's clean slate and everybody's got a shot. So you're not just happy to be there anymore. I know that from experience, like from the Giants, for example, in 2007. They had no business making the Super Bowl, and then all of a sudden they're staring at that 18-0 team. But all of a sudden you get to that point, and you're like, you know what? I'm not just happy to be here. We're in a Super Bowl. Last time I was just happy to be here, we got destroyed by the Ravens. So you know what? I'm not just happy to be here, and that turned out well. So you never know. Anything is possible. And another cliche, that's why they play the game. So for you. Good luck.
As a fan, I would have been happy being the 10th seed in the playing round and defending the fact that we should have been there and blah, blah, blah and all that. But the fact that they actually got up to the 4th seed is just absolutely incredible. And they did it, in a grinding fashion. They did it, building piece by piece. And it was just, nobody really saw it coming. And all of a sudden, they put everything together. The last piece was arguably Tom Thibodeau, who was an old assistant coach for the Knicks. He coached in a couple of different places, Chicago Bulls being one of the teams that he coached in the past. And then he ends up, after years of rumors and, flirting around, like anytime the Knicks had like a coaching vacancy, he was one of the names that was always thrown out there. Him and Mark Jackson were just every actual conversation and then it ended up being like some guy who really kind of came out of nowhere, or big. The Knicks went through like the winningest coaches to the most inexperienced coaches, and nothing ended up working out. But Tom Thibodeau has come in and he's taken the pieces, and it's just everything has just worked together, and it's amazing. But there's also there's the satisfaction that you get almost in the NBA. You can almost buy your way into success or into at least the playoffs. Maybe not guaranteeing yourself a championship, but if you spend enough money, you can end up getting superstars, and superstars. This is a superstar-driven league. But the Knicks, they did it the other way. They did it kind of just a hard hat way, and it's exciting for their fans as well because they could really rally around this team. They don't have to rally around like others, superstars of past places, and they just all of a sudden they wear Knicks jerseys, so you root for them. This is a whole different element, and it's been awesome.
Yeah, and that's another good point you made, and that makes them a likable team because ever since LeBron went to Miami, and who do you have there? Dwayne Wade, was Chris Paul, I think was the third one. What do they call the term for that? Super teams or
super teams? Yep.
But like you said, buying a championship, you put 3 absolute superstars on an NBA team, and they're going to the finals.
Yeah.
So, and so the fact that the Knicks didn't do that, and they are homegrown, and they did build this team through draft picks, and they don't really have any superstars. I mean, the Nets, same thing. They put together one of these super teams. So that makes the Knicks, all politics of the rivalry and the two teams aside, just from a neutral observer like myself, that makes the Knicks, as far as I'm concerned, a much more likable team than the Nets, because they really earned their right to be there. Whereas, the Nets, the Lakers, they pretty much bought their way to be there. Yeah, and that definitely makes the Knicks more. It's easier for a neutral observer like myself to pull for the Knicks in this situation because of that exact aspect of the team.
Absolutely. I wouldn't, me personally, I wouldn't take anything away from the Brooklyn Nets. They put themselves in that position. They ended up getting the two superstars, and then eventually, like, they paid a king's ransom for
Yeah.
for James Harden. I mean, if they don't win a championship in the next couple years, they're going to be just paying for that Harden, for the next half a decade at least. So, like, they earn their way too. But this is an exciting time for New York basketball. And New York, like, for me, New York basketball in New York is the most bandwagon sport out there. Like, anybody who's, if the 70s, if the Golden State Warriors are ahead, then everybody's wearing Golden State Warriors stuff, and then you'll see the same people the next year or 2 years later wearing Cavaliers stuff. Do you see anybody walking through the streets wearing Cavaliers stuff anymore? I mean, come on, no. But a couple of years ago, when LeBron James was, and Kyrie Irving was on that team too, they were in the, you've seen half of the people were wearing Cleveland stuff, and the other half of the people were wearing, Golden State Warriors stuff. I mean, it was just ridiculous. And New York is just big from bandwagon stuff. So the fact that they actually have two successful teams, moving forward is great. And this is my point when I bring it up as far as hockey goes, which we'll segue to right now, if the Islanders and the Rangers, if and when, which it seems like we're getting to that point, when the Islanders and the Rangers are both good, that's going to be good for hockey in New York, which New York is not exactly a hockey town to begin with. I think those two, if they end up getting, like the first and second seeds, or, in this case, Brooklyn Nets were second and the New York Knicks were fourth. When that ends up happening, I think it's going to be good for New York. Both, if they both, advance, get through a couple of rounds. What's your take on that?
Yeah, no, definitely. And, the Islanders are there. The Islanders are, and since we're both huge Ranger fans, and I can't be impartial. I just can't when it comes to the Islanders, because they would be a likable team too, because they don't really have all that many supers. They pretty much just have Barzal in terms of superstars, and he's homegrown. So, they didn't go out and make any real big free agent splash. And they picked up a phenomenal coach and probably the best GM in the history of sports in Lamoriello. And, and they're there. And the Rangers, obviously a work in progress, but very, very close. I'm very excited about next year. So, yes, the answer to your question, when the Rangers get there and both teams are contenders, it's going to be absolutely fantastic. We haven't really seen that in years with both teams being contenders. They met in the playoffs in '94, sure, but it was a 1-8 seed and the Rangers swept them. Before that, we've seen the highlights of '79, and I think they might have played once in the early '80s. Before my time, before your time, yeah. But it was huge when it happened, and hockey wasn't anywhere near on the level of popularity that it is now. So yes, when the Rangers get there and both teams are contenders, it's going to be absolutely fantastic to watch. Those games are basically playoff games every time the two teams meet, regardless of who's good and who's not, or either team are good. I've gone to Rangers Islanders games back during what I like to call the dark ages, when we didn't make the playoffs from 98 to the lockout, to the end of the lockout, 2004.
Yeah.
And the Islanders were garbage too. And I remember going to Rangers Islanders games late in the season when both teams were eliminated from the playoffs, and it was still like a playoff game in there, and there's fights in the stands. And so yeah, when both teams are contenders, it's going to be really exciting around here on the ice.
Yeah, I think it has more. I think it'll have more of a national appeal when that happens. I think it's very, very close. That's the one thing I think. What's to look at it from an impartial standpoint, which I could do, fairly well. I wouldn't say I'm, 100% an aficionado on it, but, the one silver lining of any kind of success that the Islanders would have this year, obviously the Rangers being eliminated, so there's no possibility of them having any other success at this point, would be that it would be good for New York. I think any team going through a long playoff run, especially now with the world opening up again slowly and things like that, like this is we're embarking on a great time for New York and hockey. I think this is like the early stages of it. So in the next 2 or 3 years, it's really going to start taking off, and I think hockey is going to explode in New York.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, we've seen it when the Rangers had that great run 2014, 2015. You were outside the Garden, the Hockey Town thing. It was just a great atmosphere. And again, I don't like the fact that the Islanders are a legit contender, but they are. But when you have both of them, it's just going to be really exciting.
Well, the funny thing about the playoff runs that you were saying, 2014, 2015, there were a lot of bandwagon fans. There were a lot of people that just jumped in and was like, they just wore a Ranger shirt. They were like, hey,
sure.
I'm here, have a good time and stuff like that. And
yeah,
that's where the energy comes from. So to build off of that, because obviously at this point it ended up dying down. Only the real hardcore fans stuck around. Everybody else kind of just went away and did their own different things. But if you have two teams doing that and they're battling back and forth, that's what's going to end up happening. With the Nets and the Knicks and things like that. Now, here's a scenario in the NBA. So if the number one seed ends up getting knocked off, let's say like the 76ers get knocked off by whoever comes out of the 8th seed game, then the Nets will be number 2, and then there's a possibility. Well, actually, there's more of a possibility if one of the lower teams below the Knicks end up winning their series. Like if they were an upset, that would make the Nets and the Knicks that next series, and then that would be like a total explosion for the city. I think as far as the direct competition goes, and like both having success, then you get all those bandwagon fans and you get all those casual fans, and then it really makes it fun. And if it can happen for a consistent amount of years, maybe 2, 3, 4 years down the road, then it becomes like epic, and that's the point I think that both sports are looking to get into. The chances of both, the Nets and the Knicks and the Rangers and the Islanders all exploding at one time is not very likely, but one of them is going to happen, and it'll be great when it happens, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and yeah, this being New York, there's always going to be bandwagon. It's funny, when you were talking about the basketball, I just remember all the Steph Curry jerseys I've seen in Brooklyn, and now those have quickly flipped to become Nets jerseys. And yeah, you're definitely going to see it in hockey, and I think people will probably, and I might be a little biased here, give the same disclaimer that you gave. I think people will probably gravitate more toward the Rangers just because they're the more mainstream team. In basketball, you're seeing the Brooklyn because those people are in Brooklyn. They live in Brooklyn. It says Brooklyn on the jersey. That's where they're going to go. Fine. But in hockey, I think the Rangers are definitely the more mainstream team. Islander, nothing against Islander fans. I mean, they are a diehard, crazy bunch. I got to give them credit for that. But in terms of just, people jumping on, if the two teams happen to meet in the playoffs and people, from the area got to jump on somebody, I think they'll probably jump more on the Rangers. They're more on the level of, I hate the term America's team. I really do. But I think the Rangers are more on that level. We saw it. I remember it in '94. I was a senior in high school. I mean, the entire country. You were seeing it all over the place. The Rangers were a very likable team back then. In 2014, probably not as much, but yeah, the city definitely jumped on. With both feet. Just all sorts of cliches today from me. But I think, you're going to see people are going to have to choose sides. That's what's great about a rivalry like that is having to choose sides. I mean, it's just pure civil war when those teams get together.
So our producer Charles mentioned if there was a ticker tape parade. There wasn't a parade, but there were a lot of big meetups, and Bryant Park was one of them, where that was like a central site, and around MSG there were a lot of fans gathering together. Now, so you were saying about the Rangers leading the pack. I think so too, just because of the the longer traditions, and they're kind of like the the meal ticket kind of team when it comes to New York. But in a scenario, if the if the New York Islanders, let's say this year, like they make it to the Stanley Cup Finals, or eventually if they actually won the Stanley Cup, then you would have a lot of other people who were brought into hockey because of the excitement of a winning New York Islanders franchise, and this is what would turn the casual fans into more Islanders fans than Rangers fans. So it's basically, it all comes down to success. It all comes down to winning. So if they get bumped by, right now the Islanders and the Penguins are tied at 1 in their series. If the Islanders end up getting bumped in the first round, then nothing really happens. Like there's no progression forward either way. But if the first team that has success from this point forward, because right now we're in a generation where it's just very short-term memories, very everything has to be done in like 2 or 3 seconds, or people just forget about it.
Yeah.
So it's all about the right now. So if the New York Islanders end up making a statement or a long playoff run, then they'll have more of the fan edge. But if the New York Rangers do it, in a couple years, then they'll have it too. It's just whoever does it first, really.
Yeah, and like we said, the Islanders are there, the Rangers are not. So I'm really hoping that it's not a long run for the Islanders. Again, I apologize, but I cannot be objective. Yeah. I like to consider myself a knowledgeable sports fan, and I will give credit where it's due. That does not mean I'm rooting for them. But for the casual sports fan listening in, I don't want to dissuade anybody. We talked about, I like to use the term likable teams, like we talked about with the Islanders, and they're very similar teams to how they got here and where they are now. So if the casual fan listening in does not have a dog in the fight, by all means, take up the Islanders. I will not begrudge that. Like I said, if they weren't the Islanders as they pertain to Rangers fans, then they would be a very likable team. They're exciting to watch, too. I'll tell you that. They're absolutely exciting to watch. They've got ridiculous defense. They're giving us a run for our money with best, up-and-coming Russian goalie prospect. And this guy, Sorokin's phenomenal. So, they're a likable team. And, if they win a round, make some noise, then, you're going to see a lot of Islander jerseys everywhere. And hopefully next year, 2 years, we can flip those from blue and orange to blue and red.
That's the truth. I think, that's the one silver lining in any kind of success that the other rivalry would have. Like, let's say, I'm a Knicks fan, so, if the Nets were to, win the NBA Finals, or, being a Rangers fan, if the New York Islanders end up winning the Stanley Cup, it's all about what's good for New York as a whole. And any team coming out of these four that were mentioned today, any team, eventually winning or having a long, sustained success with deep playoff runs is good for New York. And that's
sure.
It's been missing for us for a long time. Hopefully somebody makes it somewhere soon.
Yeah, amen to that.
All right, so we got a couple we have a couple minutes left in the show, so we got to talk about these no hitters. All right, so last night New York Yankees starting pitcher Corey Kluber ended up becoming the sixth pitcher this season to throw a no hitter. They're already. The modern day record is 7. The overall record since in the 1800s, a couple people did it 8 times. So we're 2 away from the all-time record. It's just incredible what's going on over here.
Yeah, that is insane. I mean, we're in May. We are in May, and there's been 6, and that stings even more knowing that Mets have 1 in our entire history. It was very, very exciting though. But 6 no-hitters. And I was under the impression that we were in more of a hitters era. And because weren't they flirting with the idea of moving the mound back?
Yeah, they were doing a whole bunch. Yeah, they had a whole bunch of different modifications getting kicked around.
So that to me, if they're flirting with the idea of moving the mound back, that to me tells me that it's because they want to increase the hitting and increase the home run. I mean, everything's all about the home run these days. That tells me that they want to, increase the hitting. Oh, you know what? That actually, okay, that makes sense. Never mind. I was thinking the complete opposite of yes. Okay, so with 6 no-hitters, obviously proves that perhaps moving the mound back might not be a bad idea.
Yeah, I don't know. It's very, it's weird how everything's kind of unfolded. The one common denominator is that there's 2 teams in, out of the 6, 3 teams have been no hit. The Cleveland's been no hit twice, Seattle's been no hit twice, and now the Texas Rangers have been no hit twice. That's the common denominator. Everything else is kind of just up in the air. You have like your former Cy Young winners like Clay Kluber, and then you have these other guys like Means and Wiley, who honestly I've never heard of before they threw these no hitters. So it's just kind of like there's the established guys doing it. There's like the new guys, up and comers doing it. It's very weird.
Mark my words, my Mets will get no hit in a game that Jacob deGrom lets up 1 hit.
Well, actually, they're in the. They're in the list of the last teams that have been no hit twice in one season. It was them and somebody else.
Of course they are.
But it's been pretty crazy. It's kind of like just like you said, like everything seems to be leaning toward the hitters nowadays, and I think the last couple of years because like the strikeouts have gone up, and then you have almost every bullpen arm can throw over 100 miles an hour. It's like the pitching has been kind of on a roaring comeback the last couple of years.
Yeah, no, it definitely has. I'm more of an action kind of baseball fan. I'll tell you, one of the best games I've ever been to was I want to say it was 2000. I was living in New York at the time, and I went to all 6 Mets Yankees game, and that was because that was the year that I plunked in the face. But for the game at Shea, where it just went back and forth, just home run after home run. The Mets, the Yankees hit like 5. Piazza hit 1, and then the Mets were down 2-1. I'm sorry, no, it was a lot more than 2-1. I'm sorry, they were down by 1 run, is what I meant to say, in the top of the 9th. And you might remember this when I'm bringing up that bottom of the 9th. I'm sorry, and the great Mariano Rivera's got bases loaded, 2 outs, and an 0-2 count, and he throws just an absolute perfect strike. I mean, no rational Mets fan will tell you that was not a strike, and they called it a ball. And then the very next pitch, Matt Franco lines it into right field for a 2-run game-winning single. I mean, I was in the upper deck in left field at Shea, and I could see that was a dead-on strike, and all the Yankee fans were screaming, and then like what? Everybody was like, what? So yeah, I like a game like that. But having said that, I can also appreciate a nice pitcher's duel. Those are really great to watch every now and then, and it's like we talked about, you Knicks fans waiting a long time. As a Mets fan, I've been waiting a long time. I mean, it's only May. Mets have a tendency to start off nice and strong, lure us into a false sense of security, but we'll see what happens there. But I think the Mets do have the ability, we'll say, to compete, and I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah, well, the Mets are in first place right now, so that's a good sign. I mean, it's very early in the season, but it is happening. Yeah, so very, very weird occurrences. That's like I think the biggest headline in the early baseball season. There's Ohtani, who's doing, he's leading the league in homers, but also, pitching pretty well. That's going pretty crazy. I think I think the buzz with him, all depends on if he's going to be able to stay healthy, because it seems like the past couple of years he's always had some kind of injuries that's held him back.
I mean, you never like to see, a guy with in any sport, any team, even the ones you hate, when you have talent like that, who, and just played with injuries. I mean, again, as a Mets fan, I grew up with it with the early 2000s or late 90s, early 2000s with Isringhausen and I can't even remember. They had a phenomenal pitching squad, and none of those guys were ever healthy. they had basically the equivalent of what they had now with Syndergaard and DeGrom. And Isringhausen's the only name I can think of off the top of my head, but none of those guys were healthy, and it just never materialized. And you hate to see that. You hate to see a guy with pure talent who's taking his career off the ground, or career is cut short due to injuries. And so, yeah, like you said, it's great that he's, hopefully maybe able to put that behind him and shine, and he is.
Yeah, it brings up an interesting point because, as far as, draft picks go and when people make these acquisitions for top talent, a lot of it, like a bust can happen, from somebody who's just not performing 100% or whatever, but a lot of it has to do more times than not is the health of the player. So, if you pick somebody first overall in any kind of draft, let's say the NHL draft, you pick him first overall, and then he ends up just having an injury-riddled season, that's a bust because he didn't produce to the top ability that he could have, but it wasn't at any fault of his own other than the actual health itself, So it brings up an interesting point there.
Yeah. I mean, we saw it with the Devils a few years ago. They had the number 1 pick, and I think that was the year that they took Nico Hershier.
Yeah.
And he wasn't supposed to be the top guy, but and they're number 1 pick a couple times, so I hope I'm thinking of the right one. But he wasn't supposed to be the top guy, and the top guy had some nagging injury issues, so they didn't roll the dice on him, and you have to shame. But it's a business, and